Welcome to the Small Church Podcast, where faith, community, and ministry intersect in the unique context of smaller congregations. I'm your host, Tony Marr, and I'm thrilled to be joined by two men who are convinced they're a little bit more talented than I am.
That is right. I'm Robert Kell, one of those supposedly more talented guys, co-host and fellow small church leader. Together, we're here to explore the challenges, triumphs, and inspiring stories within the tight-knit communities that make up our smaller churches.
And I'm Bruce Montgomery, the one here to bring even more to the table than these two and offer a unique perspective to our conversation.
So whether you believe this talent hierarchy or not, you're in for a treat. If you're a pastor, a church member, or just curious about the world of leadership, you're in the right place.
Each episode, we dive into topics that matter to you, from innovative ministry ideas to navigating the unique dynamics of a smaller congregation.
So grab your cup of coffee, settle in, and let's journey together through the wonderful tapestry of small church life.
This is the Small Church Podcast.
Well, good morning. Welcome to the Small Church Podcast. I am Tony Marr, and I'm here with my good friend and co-host, Robert Kell. Robert, how are you this morning?
Man, I am good. We have spent probably the better part of an hour before we even started this talking about the crazy. We had I think we talked about this before, the last episode. We had NACA, which is a big tournament for homeschool and Christian schools that comes together, and actually, what's amazing for us, meets like 3 hours from our house. So we played teams from Chicago and Alabama and just, pretty widespread places that all came to Chattanooga for a 3-day period, and got home, had Mother's Day with our amazing, my wife, the kid's mom, and then we delivered one of our boys to Talladega, Alabama to go work for Student Life camps all summer playing bass guitar. It's good. A lot of emotions, a lot of fun, a lot of excitement, but it's really good. How about you?
Our life has been equally crazy.
I have like 3 graduations in the same day coming up.
Yeah, we've got two of our girls graduating from high school this coming weekend, one of which had a second surgery on her leg and ankle this past week.
Because they couldn't just make this normal. They had to make it exciting.
That's right. Yep. And so it's been a crazy time as well. It is just you and I today. Bruce is on vacation with his beautiful wife, Carol, and they're going to be gone for the next several weeks. We did get some news a couple of days ago, I guess yesterday, actually, that Carol reached out and said while they were on vacation that Bruce had a stroke, and got some positive news last night, and then some more positive news about 30 minutes before we started recording this, that Bruce was talking this morning and moving his
about
hand
Bowling
and
Green,
feet about Bowling Green,
which we know is a good thing.
If you're an active listener to the Small Church Podcast, you know that Bruce has very fond memories of his time as the campus minister at Bowling Green State University. And I'm still not sure if it's the Bowling Green in Kentucky or the Bowling Green in Ohio. I'm still not sure. We could never really come to any consensus on that. But so if you're listening to this show, please keep Bruce in your thoughts and in your prayers, as he has a battle ahead of him. And we anxiously await him joining us back on the Small Church Podcast, hopefully when he gets back from his trip and out of the hospital. And we're still not sure what all of that is going to look like, but things are definitely looking up and much more positive than they were about 24 hours ago. So very thankful to God for that.
Yes.
And please keep him in your thoughts and prayers, and Carol and the kids as they are in Florida, not even at home, dealing with this. So yeah, we're not going to spend much time talking about that because we've got positive signs coming out of that this morning, just as of 30 minutes ago. But please keep Bruce in your thoughts over the course of these next couple days and weeks. When you hear this show, hopefully he will be back and doing great. So we're hopeful for that, praying for that, and like I said, hopeful for that will come to happen. Yeah. So these past couple weeks have been crazy. We haven't seen each other in quite a while.
It's been a minute
because of travels and all of that. For our listeners, they don't know that because we have had an episode drop every single week for the last 57 weeks, which is pretty crazy. But man, I've missed you.
Yes. And it's crazy. I was talking to, your name came up with something. Somebody was, like yelling at someone about something, and Tony Marr's name came up, and I was going, I would expect that right there. Now I'm trying to think where it was. Somebody mentioned it, and I was your name, and I was just going, man, I see Tony like hours a week, and it is just weird when I'm in these rhythms that I don't get to do that. So so it's,
I really think though that you've been hiding because my Dodgers swept your Braves a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, well, they did, and they are a very, very, very good team, and for their payroll, they should be. And when they get Shohei pitching, if he ever pitches again, they will be very scary. It's very tough when you take your pitcher and you have that level of a bat, and you can remove your DH and put your best players on the field. And occasionally you get a really good DH. I think Ozuna does a really good job at that. It's a very hard thing. The hardest thing to do just about in all of sports is to hit a baseball, and you've got a guy that not understand these guys are professionals, but not warming up. He's not playing the field. He's not in the rhythm of the game. He's just eating sunflower seeds and chewing bubble gum, and he walks out there and just crushes the ball. And I know every team has someone that's doing that, but I just think that's a really hard thing. But it's a really big deal when you can take and get all 9 of your players in the rhythm of the game, and Shohei's very, very special.
Yeah, he hit one out last night that, it was I don't know how there was a cover left on the ball. I don't know how there was anything for the fans. He hit it. They're playing the team from up north in San Francisco, who shall not be named in this house. And he hit the ball into the ocean yesterday, over the right field wall into the ocean. He's something else.
Yeah, he's a special player, and for his sake, I'm glad everything, and for baseball's sake, it sounds bad. Forget his. He should, he maybe could have managed his money better. He could have paid more attention. There's a million things. But for all of us as fans that just want to see the best players play, it's a little bit like Pete Rose. Like, come on, let Pete in the Hall of Fame. Pete did his job, and you're punishing him for something that happened way after he retired from baseball. Well, from playing. I'm sorry. But yeah, man, Shohei's special. And I think that we as fans would be the ones that would have lost if they would have done something that really kind of leveled in on him. So, I love sports, but honestly, I don't even know when the Celtics play again. I think
tonight. They play tonight.
I think we're up 3-1.
You are up 3-1. No Donovan Mitchell.
So, I can't control that. We don't have Kristaps. So, players, we're very fortunate.
I was saying I think it's going to end tonight because Donovan Mitchell's not playing.
Yeah. And then I think they lost tonight because LeBron showed up. It's...
Yeah, but LeBron picked the perfect night to come when their 2 best players weren't playing. So, I think that was strategic on LeBron's part.
Yeah. So I love sports, but life wise and rhythm of life, like it definitely means a lot more to you than it does to me.
It's my therapy. It really is. And after weeks like what we've both had, it's a whole lot cheaper than going to the actual therapist.
True that.
I know that every evening, 162 days out of the year, I'm going to have Joe Davis and Oral Hershiser that are welcome me into their living room, and it's like sitting down with family, and it doesn't matter how crazy of a day it's been. I've got that moment just to kind of check out and unwind and sit down with my friends. Yeah, that have no idea who I am.
That's how I feel with most of the podcasts I listen to. There's 2 things I think about with those. One, I think like, man, you guys have no clue who I am, and you really invest in my life a ton. And 2, if I ever meet you in real life, I'm going to need you to talk at 1.5 speed because I don't listen to podcasts at normal. I'm going to need you to talk faster. So yeah, that's what I'm going to need.
Yeah. So there has been a lot of crazy things that have happened in the last, since we've last been together. A couple of things that have made headlines that, not just headlines in the church world, but headlines in
national
CNN,
news,
national news, international news. Some of it. You've got, of course, the situation with the pastor in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, that is sweeping the nation. My wife is a crime junkie, and she's a crime anything junkie. While I'm watching baseball, she's normally watching Dateline or the latest Netflix murder document, How to Catch a Killer or whatever it is type thing. and her favorite podcaster takes on a case and like follows that and breaks the case and does more than a lot of times the FBI and CIA and all those guys do. And she told me that her podcaster just announced that that was the next case that she was picking up and looking into. And so that has gotten crazy around the world for all the wrong reasons. And you just got to feel sorry for the pastor's wife and her family and all that they're going through and struggling through. And not going to get into all that, but the other one that has really swept the nation is this church in Pennsylvania where the pastor was in the middle of his sermon and the guy stepped out, all caught on their live stream to try to shoot him, and people in the church tackled him and tucked the gun away, and that's gone, as the kids say, viral. And people have been talking about that all over. He's been doing interviews on CNN and any news outlet that he could get on, and people have become really kind of captivated, and that sparked some things that we're going to be discussing today, and that's church security. And it's something that I've had several conversations about, dealt with head on a couple of times in my ministry and in my life. And it's something that oftentimes small churches don't pay attention to. I think it's a lot of times even large churches don't pay a lot of attention to is church security. And when you have things like just this past weekend, and we're time dating ourselves a little bit, there was another issue at a Catholic church in Louisiana where there was a teenager trying to get in the back door during a communion service with a gun. And the police had to be called. People had to come in. Thankfully, there were no issues in that situation either, that everything was resolved peacefully there. Or not peacefully, but without injury.
Without death,
You've got the horrible tragedy that happened in Charleston a few years ago, that there seems to be these things that you're hearing about in the news every couple of months. It seems like that something's happening, and there's just been an onslaught here in the last few weeks that it's happened. And so we want to spend some time today for our listeners to kind of talk through church security, what that looks like, what are the necessities, how do you go about that with limited resources and oftentimes limited people.
So a question in this real quick, and I don't want to go deep, I don't want to spiral too far here. Do you think that, so one, there are more people on the planet right now than there have been in the rest of history of the world combined? I mean, like, it is just so many people on the globe. But do you think that there is, and I'll say this per capita maybe, like, do you think per capita it is just up significantly, these attacks and things, or do you think we're just more aware because of 24/7 news cycles and social media and live streams, things that used to we didn't have, that wouldn't get out so quickly and stuff? Do you think that there is a lot more violence inside of the church, or do you think we're just getting a lot more opportunity to see it because of how news is distributed now?
I think both.
Okay.
I really think it's both. I don't know that we would have heard about what happened in Pennsylvania if it wasn't on live stream.
Yeah.
It wasn't seen and it wasn't shared on, one social media, and then the next and the next and then the next. And then before you know, the local news stations are picking it up, and the national news is picking it up, and then everyone's talking about it.
And there's people like your lovely bride that she doesn't do this because we're friends on social media, but that's their happy place. Is and I don't mean this in a bad way, they share everything, especially if they're into these types of things, they share it. And so it does go quickly because there are people that's where they find their real connection, is they see things like this, it's their thing, and they share it because they want everybody to know. It's not in a narcissistic, like, I'm trying to be the next, true crime podcaster. I share these things and I bring awareness to this. So there are, like you said, there are a lot of people that when they see something, they feel like it's their duty to share that out and let the world know this is happening for whatever reason they have, but they do that for their own personal reasons.
Yeah, I completely agree. But then the other side to that, to your question, is I do think that, especially in the United States, that there's a tension right now. We're in an election year. There's this tension that is just thick right now. And there are a lot of people on edge, and oftentimes the church gets drug into that, or is at the forefront of some of that for people, and is something that's an easy target, I think, a lot of times, because churches don't have the same kind of security measures as a lot of other places in society.
So as we're making this transition and we're starting to dive into the topics a little bit, I do think it's important that people think about this from a couple of perspectives. And one is the fact of, like, we think about security from these things that we're talking about, of these potentially extremely violent moments that happen that can be very dangerous. It's probably been a decade or so ago now that shooting in Texas, that somebody walks in and just mows down. I mean, that killed 40 people or something.
Yeah.
It is absolutely just horrifying to hear about that and to think through that. But there's also security in the side of, how's your children's ministry protected? Because you and I have both been in multiple situations throughout our years of ministry and just life in general, where mom and dad have gone through a divorce. One of those parents is not allowed to have access to the kid. And if your security isn't, how do you check kids in and out? Do you have a door? Do you have somebody, if you don't have doors, if you meet in a open space or you're in a school or something like that, and you don't have a way to really quarantine things off, do you have security? Or do you have a team of people that are just monitoring? If security's too stressful of a word for your church and your organization, do you have people who are intensely monitoring and making sure that the people who come in and out, that they have access to be where they need to be? And if they don't, that they're just willing to go, hey, can I help you? Oh, I'm just kind of looking around. Well, hey, we have something going on back here today. I know this may be a public space, but today we rent this. So I'm going to need you to hang up front until this time so that we can, for the safety of our children and leaders who are around here. And I mean, I just think that there are multiple tiers to this thing. I mean, the sad thing is some people have people more intently guarding their coffee pots than they do their children.
Very true.
And their staff. And I'll just very transparently say, I never think about this as far as personally for me. I am not one of these people that's crazy worried about stuff. If I go out preaching and that's how somebody needs to do that, then it's there. Now, I will say this as well. I am very fortunate that I have our bivocational worship pastor is a police officer. Our sound tech is a police officer. I mean, we have multiple people in our room who are law enforcement or security, that they have legal carry permits and they are prepared for those types of situations. My deacons are very aware. So our situation is good, but this isn't something that I personally think about from me as a pastor's perspective very often. But I do think about it from our kids. How do we protect them? And how do I take care of the people who show up every week and make sure that they're as protected as they can be?
Yeah, I can remember when that shooting happened that you were talking about. I was a lead pastor at a church back then, a pretty large church.
Decent sized church too, yeah.
It shook us so much so that one of our key leaders actually said we need to have a security plan in place. And it prompted some change in our church to where we did put a security team in place, that we had police officers that were in our church that trained them. And then we had an actual plan, security plan and security team in place that we'll get into in a little bit. But it was prompted by that. And I can remember the feeling of, wow, this is real. I've experienced it a couple of times in my life. When I was a kid, late elementary school, early middle school, at our church, we had a person on a Wednesday night service. So it wasn't a Sunday night service, but Wednesday night at my home church, Central Christian in Las Vegas, that someone ran up on stage with a knife to go after our pastor. And my dad and another guy in our church actually ran up and tackled him. And so that was something that I can vividly remember. We also had another situation when I was in high school this time, where our church rented out the Thomas and Mack Center, which is where UNLV plays basketball. It's a 18,000 seat basketball arena. They rented it out for Easter. They wanted to have the entire church together for one big Easter service. And it was an exciting time, lots of energy. You've got 10, 11, 12,000 people. I don't remember how many it was in the mid 90s for Central back then, but all together in one place. And in the middle of service, a lady stands up and starts screaming at the stage, like screaming top of her lungs. I don't even remember what she was saying, but she was just screaming and making her way down the concourse, making her way down towards the stage. And, they had a great team in place that was able to get her and escort her out. You had Joel Osteen's church, talking just a couple weeks ago, that had a lady show up with a gun, I think, if I'm remembering correctly. And they had a team in place that was able to stop her before she could do anything and get her out of the situation. I think she showed up with like a shotgun or something like that and was walking around the church during service with it.
Good security gets rated.
Absolutely.
Because they're typically not seen. I remember being a younger kid. I might have been middle school age and sitting at a basketball game. It was a high school tournament game, and they were playing at a local college. And, when a game's close, as fans, you always feel like your team's getting shafted by the officials. And this one guy just felt like his team was not getting the treatment they deserved. And he came out of the stands in the late 80s, early 90s with a chair and was like going to whack the official during the game. And to their security, and you really couldn't tell this because they're just leaned up against the wall hanging out, were two huge linemen from this college's football team. And this was not a large man that was there. And they bounced that dude like skipping a rock across. I mean, they pummeled him. These two guys just leveled him before he could get up. And I say drug him out. It was more like you or I grabbing a toothpick and carrying it out of a room. But like, good security is not typically seen. It's people are aware it's there, but it's not seen. But it is able to accomplish what it needs to in an instant moment, because it wasn't like this guy at this basketball game or this lady up in this stadium. It wasn't like that they just had people standing 3 feet from every person. I mean, these security officers and these security team was at a very assigned place, and they had to be able to be aware to move quickly. It's a lot like lifeguarding. I mean, you've just got to be alert to everything that's going on, because you never know in a moment when you may have to respond and do your job.
Yeah, and people are passionate about their church. You and I have both experienced the dark side of when someone,
the good and the bad of that passionate.
Yeah. And when it is bad, it's bad. Mm-hmm. I can remember the only time, I've had a couple of times where I felt that my personal safety and the safety of my family was in question. Excuse me. I had one time that we had a person who was a leader in our church, a very volatile leader in our church, that we had to enact some church discipline. And me and a couple other of our key leaders met with him, and it did not go well. Did not go well at all. And I can remember going home and saying, this guy knows where I live. He's been in my house on several occasions, and I could really see him coming to my house with a gun. And the way that our meeting had ended, the way that he left, the things he said as he left, I could remember thinking, I'm going to make sure all my doors are locked tonight, because I could really see this guy, trying to retaliate in some way, just snapping, and us all reading about it on the news in the next morning.
Other people reading about
it. Yeah. The other time is, and I've had situations like this a couple of times where people will say something to you, or you'll receive an email or something where you're like, that is creepy. How did you know that? I had one time someone confront me about my integrity. They said they were upset as a pastor the movies that I was watching. And I said, how do you even know what movies? And they said, well, I know for a fact that you were watching Saving Private Ryan the other night. I was like, well, first off, I was watching Saving Private Ryan. How do you know that That's creepy that you know that. And they had watched through my big bay window. They had seen me through my window in my home, and they were close enough to have seen and paying enough attention to know what movie I was watching. And I can remember saying, I'm pretty sure that's a crime, that you were close enough that you could see and paying enough attention to know what I was watching on my TV from outside of my house. And the fact that you just told me that, first off, I don't think that there's anything wrong with watching Saving Private Ryan. I would watch Saving Private Ryan if Jesus was sitting beside me physically. I don't think that that was a sin that you should be bringing up right now. But let's address the fact that you were stalking me, that you were what was going on here. And so I can remember from that feeling that is creepy that someone was paying that close of attention to my personal life, that they were watching me from outside of my house.
Which I think is one of the things we have to think about. And I don't, this isn't the time to go into this, but it's something that as we're discussing this, I want the people to think about who you set up to be the lead of your security. I've got a friend who is at a church, and he just talked one day. He said, I would never want the person who seems to be anxious to shoot someone as the head of my security. Like, they're all gung-ho. They're going to make sure everything's done. And there's a part of this that you really want to step in and you want to go, yeah, but you want somebody that's super passionate. Yes, when you're talking about leading children's ministry or small group ministry or, something along those lines, your mission teams, like you want somebody who's maybe a little over the top even. But you need somebody who is controlled passion, controlled excitement when it comes to security, because when somebody comes in and something happens and someone gets shot, because this is the thing we're talking about here. Somebody pulls the gun. Like the other thing we're going to say, we're talking, especially in the last 2 to 3 weeks, or the 2 or 3 weeks before recording this podcast, every one of these situations was diffused without someone being shot. And if you've got someone that their whole thing is I'm locked, loaded, ready to roll, like this is an Expendables movie, it may not be the mindset you need to. I would say it's not. A couple of my other friends would agree with this. And so it's just like giving a chihuahua a gun and saying, go take care of everything. And they just yip all the time. And that would be my, like, just something to be aware of. Like, you've got to get somebody who knows security, that wants to do it, but you just can't have somebody who's anxiously awaiting to shoot someone, hoping that someone comes and tries to kill you or attack you as the pastor so that they get to unleash their wrath and do what they need to do. So,
but then don't you think it comes back to the conversation that we had a couple of weeks ago about volunteers and equipping volunteer teams, that if this is something, and you're in a small church, and so you have very few people, but this is something that you know that we need to do, and you've got maybe only 1 or 2 people who are willing to take this on, and they are that
chihuahua.
They're that chihuahua. How do you respond to that? When you've asked for help, there's a need, you have someone willing to fill that need, but you're like, I'm just not sure that you're the right person to fill that need.
So I would say 2 things about this. One, I think this is always, it's one thing to say, hey, we're looking for, opportunities to serve, plug in, here's 3 or 4 or 5 things that you can do. You typically already have a children's ministry, though. Maybe your children's ministry person, the person that leads that, left. Maybe your small groups leader left. Maybe your host team, cafe, door holders, all those, maybe the leader of that team left. And typically you can move somebody up. But if you're starting a security team from scratch, I would say this isn't a Sunday morning announcement. I would say it's a personal question. And I think it starts in a space of having a conversation of, hey, tell me about, as watching these things online, how does this, did you see these videos? I know you're really passionate about security and Second Amendment and all these other things. And you kind of get into that space. And I think you start with a casual conversation of sitting over a cup of coffee and working through some stuff. And I don't know, for me, that seems to be a starting place. And then as you're doing that, definitely, if someone has the potential, I think they can be coached. The struggle my friends are in some of these things is the person isn't like they're so deep in and so heavy now, like you would almost have to remove them to make things a little more focused that isn't so crazy. So yeah, I think it's from the start though. I mean, I think it's just got to be a better conversation up front to kind of be like, hey, the goal is always this. And that's going to be something where you're going to have to reach out to some people and have some conversations, talk to the local chief of police or something like that, especially if you're in a small town. I mean, we've got 2 or 3 chiefs of police in our area, and I could text any of them and say, hey, could I have, it doesn't hurt that I've also got guys that do a lot of training and stuff in my church, and I can say, hey, can we go grab lunch one day and talk through this, and how do we make this better and stuff. So I know I totally get where you're at. I think that in that space, I'm not saying it's better to go without it. I definitely want that to be heard. I just think that how do you start that conversation well?
Yeah. I'm interested to ask you this next question, Robert. In the situation that you're in, that most of my full-time, long-term ministry, we've done a lot of interim ministries in small country churches over the last decade or so, but most of my time in full-time 60, 70 hour a week for years has been in larger churches, and a lot of that in larger cities. I can remember, like I said, when that shooting happened a few years ago, it sent shockwaves through the Christian community, and it prompted questions and response, not just from our staff, but from people in our church. As I said just a minute ago, it was a layperson in our church who said, we have to have a security team in place, and took the lead on all of that. And it was great. It went incredibly well. But I can even remember then that there was some anxiety in the first few Sundays coming back to church after that, when lead story on every news outlet in the world was about this horrific tragedy that had taken place at a church. I can remember at 9/11, the first time that I went back to a major sporting event, there was a little bit of an anxiety. How safe are we really? Do we have this manufactured sense of security that we carry around with us, when really, are we really all that safe? When our news channels and our social media have been flooded with these incidents over the last few weeks, is there a level of anxiety or fear that comes to the average American churchgoer as they're walking into worship on a Sunday morning? Maybe not so much you, but
no.
Are you sensing anything?
What a great question
in your people?
So not at my church. Don't really sense that. Nobody's coming up to me having these conversations. I'm also a very no violence type of guy. I've never thrown a punch in my life. I don't personally like guns. There are a couple at my house only because when my dad passed away, somebody had given them to my dad under the stipulation they had to come to me. And I'm going so I literally brought them, I got them home, and I was so nervous with them. I don't know how to flip out. I don't know. I really don't. I know how to point and pull, but if it's anything more than that, I don't know where the safety is. I don't know anything about these things. I've never fired a gun that wasn't paint, BB, or Nerf. I mean, it is just that whole thing. So I've got a neighbor who's in law enforcement, and he came over and checked them. I've got another neighbor another friend, excuse me, another friend who is a very, very key gun, very focused gun guy, and he took them and cleaned them and made sure everything was okay. And just so they didn't rust, I didn't want them to go bad, because my boys don't necessarily share the same life approach as me. I think that in America, especially, and that's all I can speak to, I've really not been out of the country a whole lot. I think that we have this unrealistic idea of safety that we go into, and I'm not sure it's a biblical principle. I'm not sure that safe is something that God designed for us inside of our Christian life. So for me, I approach this from a very different angle. I heard Erwin McManus one time talk about the fact that he had shown up overseas somewhere, and he had walked in and he got to this place, and they're like, the translator and stuff was like, hey, I'm going to go check you guys into your room. and get everything checked in and stuff. And you can go kind of look around for a second. Just don't go down that street. He left, and all of his team looked at him. They're like, we're going down that street, aren't we? He said, absolutely. And he's just like, because safe isn't the goal. Francis Chan talks about a lot of those things. And so those are guys that I look at in that space. My church personally, there's not. Also, I'm going to go on a limb and say 30% of my church is carrying most weeks. Which might be what you were getting at a little bit of, hey, how does your church handle this, and what is that space? And so, we're in a small rural town that a lot of people carry. Now, I'm all for the Second Amendment. Just because I personally don't doesn't mean I think other people shouldn't be able to. And so if people go through the right things and they're responsible with it, I'm okay with that. As far as the anxiety and the things in that space, I may not always do the best job of addressing those things. I may not be the right person that always, because I think there's some pastors who come in and they're very much on stage and they're hitting that stuff and, hey, let's talk about this and let's talk about this. And I just kind of come in and if it was something, I don't know, because I say that, but I can't remember a time I've ever done it if I was given the stage. And I'm going, maybe there's a time if it was really extreme. But all this stuff happening in the last 2 or 3 weeks, I won't ever address. I won't address any of that. I might talk to my security team and go, hey, there seems to be a heightened sense of stuff. Our lead pastor is very aware of this. Like, we're a network of churches. If you're kind of new to the podcast, the church I pastor at. And so I'm the campus pastor at one of 3 campuses. And one day he showed up with a kit and I didn't really know what it was. But we were sitting just a couple Wednesday nights ago and one of our deacons brought in a med kit and just Band-Aids and stuff like that. And it was a really amazing kit though. And I said, hey, we also have this. And he's like, are you kidding me? He's like, it's like those huge pads that if somebody gets shot and it's got the tourniquets and all these things in it. And he's like, 90% of the people in this building will not know how to use this, even if you hand it to them. I didn't know how. And so our lead pastor is very intentional about this, which probably gives me a little bit of ease. So I don't have to be as worried about it because I've got somebody else who walks into the building every week and does it. So with that said, I'm not the best person always because I don't address those things from stage. And I think just being in a small town, people feel a little more sense of security. And this isn't is it Jason Aldean? This isn't like try that in a small town type of statement. I'm not saying that at all. But I think sometimes people are very cautious to try things in a small town because if you're trying it, you typically know everybody.
Right.
And you know who's doing what.
Yeah. So, but with that all being said, what can churches do to be proactive in their security measures? Maybe not completely going over the tilt with having, armed guards at the front door like Buckingham Palace or anything like that. But what are some things that some real practical steps that churches can do to be proactive?
Well, I think the first thing, and this is what we did, is you have the conversation. You sit with your staff. And when I say staff, I'm very fortunate that I'm full-time and I've got 2 part-time people that work with me. When I say part-time, these are lightly compensated, high-end volunteers. And they are thankful for the money and the resources that help them, but they do way more than they get paid. But then we've got a deacon leadership team, and I sit with those men and women, and we talk through some things like that. Hey, are there things you need? We recently had a shift in children's ministry, and the first thing that was asked was, hey, what can happen here? And I'm like, what do you want to happen? And it was just very much like, we're going to start locking down doors. We're going to start being a little more intentional here. And it wasn't anything bad from the previous person. They were very present, but the new person was just like, I'd rather have these doors shut. And I'd rather be hanging here so that when they open, it's like, hey, how are you? How can I help you? And instead of just having somebody just wandering through, oh, well, I'm the grandmother of so-and-so. That's great. Your child dropped them off back here. They'll be done in 40 minutes. You can go sit with them in service. And those are hard conversations.
Yeah.
So have the conversation and then identify a person. Identify someone in your space that is smart, that is competent around these topics. If you don't have someone, if you don't have someone who maybe is competent, but you have someone who's willing and very teachable, then like seriously call your local, police office, or talk to somebody that that's a police officer and go, hey, what would it look like for me to get some training? I know our church hosts an active shooter training at least once a year that we encourage all of our deacons, all of our security team to go and sit in just so they are aware. When I was at Bristol Motor Speedway, when I was working there, we yearly had to sit in a active shooter and I'm assuming they still do this, an active shooter situation. And we went through drills and different things, and it wasn't fun.
I think that's really interesting that, our schools do that.
Yeah.
When I was growing up, we had fire drills, and that was about the extent of it.
Sorry, I'm laughing. When we were at NACA, the fire alarm went off in our hotel, and it had been really bad storms. And Melissa at first thought it was a tornado, and I'd actually laid down. I was taking a nap. So I kind of got up, and I'm getting my shoes on. I'm looking for my coffee, and she's like, and I'm like, look, if it was a tornado, they'd have told us to get our biggest book out from under our desk and go sit in the hallway. We would be fine. And I peeked out the door, and I was like, Mel, people are standing outside. I don't think it's a tornado. She's like, then the building's burning down. And I was like, they're still standing in the door with the firemen there beside them. I think we're okay. And she's like, it's so loud. I said, then go outside. Threw my AirPods in, muted them, and I got my coffee and my shoes, and I went outside. Anyway, you said that about the school.
Yeah, I was saying schools now, when we were growing up, we had fire drills, and that was about it.
Yeah.
Now they're doing active shooter drills regularly in schools, and so that the kids know what happened, and the teachers, faculty and staff and students all know what their plan is. I thought it was really interesting that you said your church does that once a year with your key leaders. I'll be honest, I hadn't heard of that being done before, but maybe we need to take a lesson from our schools and say, if this is something that we truly view as a viable threat, that we need to be prepared for it. And what you guys are doing, I commend you for doing that. And I'm wondering, how far does that go? Is that something that we should be talking about with our congregations as a whole, or is it just something with the leaders, that if you have the leaders that are going through that? I don't know of churches that do fire drills, in case there's an event that happens there. I've actually been preaching one time at a church when the fire alarm went off, and we had to move everything in the middle of the service outside because the fire alarm was going off. But we didn't practice fire drills. Definitely didn't do active shooter drills with any church that I've ever been a part of. Is that something that you think just doing it with your leadership is enough, or is it something that the whole church should be a part of?
The drills are interesting. The training, I would say leaders, because I don't know that everyone could handle the training.
Yeah.
When I was at the YMCA, we were so close to the high school. We were close to the high school, the middle school, and one of the 4 elementary schools in the county that we were in. Literally, they were across the street. And so when they had active shooters, we were on their call list because we were a part of the plan for fire or different things, that if there was a fire drill, they would walk their kids to our playground. And from the elementary schools and things like that, we were a part of their exit strategy. So they would call us, and there were a couple of moments where they're like, hey, we've got this. And then I would have to call like the principal or the superintendent of schools, and they would be like, you might, and our fitness center was all glass windows, and we'd have to go in and empty the fitness center. Lock all the doors, shove all the kids and people in. Look, you can walk out those doors if you want. You're an adult. We can't stop you. But all the kids, we would quarantine them into a room with no windows. We had steps that we as leadership were doing. The police were patrolling and circling our building. Those were things that we had to do. And as we started to, there's levels. If you have so many kids, you can function as a daycare, and it's a building like ours, and it was okay. If you wanted to have more, you had to get certified by the state. And as we were going through state certifications, we had entire binders that certain different drills, and we had to run a fire drill every quarter. We had to do these things at the YMCA with the kids, and so we would come in and just, whoop, 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 here you go, this is the fire drill, and the kids would all have to go and and the leaders would have to learn, because these are, 17 to 22-year-old kids, older high school, college-age jobs. They would learn, I've got to grab a binder, I've got to get this, I've got my checklist, here's the kids who are here today, I've got to check these things off and work through this. And so it was exhausting the month that we had to put all that together. And it took about a month with like 5 people working on it.
Yeah.
But at the end, our staff was in a really good space to handle all of those things. So when you go to the church, I think sometimes too, this is maybe a little bad that we don't always take that much effort and time at the church, because a lot of times you've got people like me or people who are principals at schools and all these things, and they have to do this stuff every day, but yet they come to the church and they don't take that time and opportunity to really step in and do that.
So something that I think is really interesting and just processing through all this as you've been talking is I look at, this has been an epidemic that's been happening in our country, increased violence really back since Columbine.
Yeah.
So our government,
which was 2001, is that right?
Yeah. Our governments, something like that. Our governments are keenly aware of this, and we're seeing changes in our public schools. A blended family, half my kids are homeschooled, half the kids go to public school. The ones in public school, just in the last, I've got 2 daughters, as we said, graduating this weekend. One of them, we had what they call class night the other night, where they say goodbye to the senior class and then raise up the juniors to the senior class, and it's this cool ceremony that they do. And in that, they do this comical thing where a couple of the seniors kind of give the history of the last 4 years and what was special about this class, what all they went through. And they talked about all of the different new security measures that their school has implemented just in the last 4 years as a response to the increased violence that we've seen in schools. And they've done crazy things. When we were there, we needed to get something to our daughter, and she'd left something in her car that we needed. She could not walk out of the school to come with us to the parking lot to get something out of the car that we needed to get to her. We had to go get it and then go back into the school to give it to her. She was not allowed to come outside of the school. They have name tags now that have a QR code on them to scan them in and out of doors that all the students have, and they are not allowed in the school in the morning. Our son forgot it one time, and he wasn't allowed into school until someone got him his ID and brought it back. They are actively trying to take steps to make their school system more secure and safe. And yet I think for the vast majority of churches, it's not even something that's discussed. And yet, doing some quick research here, there were 430 of violence, hostility and violence against churches in America in 2023. 430. That was more than double the number of in 2022. An 800% increase in incidents since 2000. And on average, in the United States, there are 39 attacks of hostility and violence against churches every month. That's mind-blowing to me to hear that. And yet it's something that we don't often talk about.
Yeah, no, that's a lot. Just trying to think about, and even if you think about that as, that's almost one estate every month. And that people go, how many churches are in it? Yeah, I get it. But I mean, and sure, they might be, when you think about places that come across as high crime areas and things like that. I mean, maybe, Memphis is one of the highest crime places in the entire country. And you think about that and you go, okay, well, maybe 8 of them are in Memphis. Sure. But like the fact that almost 1 per state is happening every month, that's a lot to process and sit on. And how do we take this a little more seriously so that we care for the people in our life?
So you're in a really unique place, as you said before, that in your small church, you have 2 people that are very involved, one on stage and one in your sound booth, that are both police officers, probably carrying. I would maybe think that your worship leader isn't packing while he's on stage.
Yeah, probably not while he's leading.
He might have one in the sock. You never know.
Yeah.
But so you're in a
Tango
very
and Cash style, drops down, pulls it out of his boot.
You're in a unique situation that I think a lot of small church pastors probably don't have that luxury. But what are some things that small churches, in a large church, you're going to have a large enough pool and the resources that you know, with enough time and energy put into it, I think that you can have a good security team in place, a good security protocol and process in place, an action plan that can give you some sense of safety and security. With a small church, limited people, what are some things that any church can do to begin to address some of these issues and concerns?
Yeah, I think that, you know, ultimately, I mean, this really starts with praying for God. If you don't have anything, praying for God just to reveal someone who would be really good in that role. And the funny thing is, so many times, you know, it's this whole, like we talk about training versus trying inside of conversations, and we train in every area of our life except our faith. And then we try not to, I'm trying not to be anxious. I'm trying not to be angry. I'm trying not to be, you know, all these different emotions, feelings, or struggles and sins that we have. We try not to do those, but Scripture kind of sets up the train. I think with so many things, when it comes to church, man, we really do. We pray, God, provide, give, like put somebody in here. But then we're like, I'm trying to find somebody that could lead this area or ministry. And sometimes we forget to really pray about that. And then I think that you've got two kind of things. One, are you in a facility that you own, or are you in a facility that you rent? You're going to have some limitations, potentially in both, but you're going to have a lot more of a limitation in a space that you rent, that you show up and set up and tear down every week. And so how do you start to, and some of you, and literally, I know some of you listening are going, we rent out a local coffee shop, and they've got this little room off to the side that we are able to put our children's ministry in. And I have 20 adults total every Sunday. 2 of them go lead children's ministry, and then there's 17 people plus me. I understand what that might feel like to let one of those 17 people go, or 2 of those 17 people every week be there and go and just walk that hallway in between, kind of check outside and look at stuff, but being willing to do the things needed to sacrifice to make sure that your children and your church members are, I hate to use this word, I was going to say safe, but protected, cared for. Cared for might be a better way for me to say that. That you're caring for and protecting them in a way that you as a leader are kind of held accountable to. When you've got your own space, it might mean you need to go in and go, do I need to put up a door here? Do we need to put up a wall with a door in it that has, you know, it doesn't have to have an access code. It's just the door shuts, and we can have somebody that's on the other side of that door that's very aware every time it clicks, like they're up and they're at it, kind of like our situation right now. And then I think when you find that person, that man or woman that is very intelligent and very willing to lead in a security space, how do you resource and equip them? If they are a law enforcement person or they run security and do things, man, awesome. Good for you. You just hit the gold mine, and there's actually really large churches around this country that would probably love to have your resource. If you find somebody who's very capable and willing but just doesn't have the training, look inside of some opportunities. I mean, there are churches and organizations all over the place that do active shooter trainings. There are churches and organizations that do trainings that help you know how to set up and run a security team for your church or organization. And I think those are the steps that kind of get you down that path. And then at that point, it's going to start really small. And just make sure from the beginning that you're working with that leader who's now taking this area over. And you're going, hey, who's one other person we could identify so that 26 times a year, you're doing it 26 times a year, they're doing this. And then as the church grows, as more people come in, you start to identify another person or two. And then maybe you get 2 people a week for 26 times a year. And then you get 2 people a week that's, you know, 3 times. I can't do the math fast enough to do three times a month, instead, you know, or once every 3 weeks instead of once every other week. So
when we implement our security team at the church that I was at, there were a couple of weeks after when it was first set up that I had one of our guys, armed guys, that followed me everywhere that I went within the church. And after a couple of weeks of that, I said, guys, this is ridiculous. Come on. We can't do this anymore. I know of a couple of pastors that have someone that follows them everywhere they go. That's a personal bodyguard, not outside of the church, but in the church when they're walking around the church. I think that maybe that's a little extreme, especially for a small church. But I think that you've got a great opportunity here, especially in line with what we talked about with volunteerism a few weeks ago, in that I would almost guarantee you that regardless of the size of your church, you've got someone in your church that you would love to see more involved. You would love to see more invested into your church. And you've got someone that this is something that they would absolutely be thrilled to do. And so maybe it's as simply, it doesn't require a lot. You put them through a training that, like you said, I think you can call your local police department and they will come and do a seminar for free for the 1, 2, or 3 people in your church that maybe you can get on board with this. And then it's simply just empowering them, giving them the title and empowering them after they're trained and equipped to say, you're just protecting us. You're just here to be aware. You don't need to accost people as they're coming in the door. You don't need to do a full body cavity search of everyone who comes in our door. You're just aware. And then, you're sitting near the back or in the front, whatever you're instructed on. It gives them a sense of belonging. It gives them a sense of responsibility. And you've now created a need. You've now filled a need that your church has, and you've also given someone a place of belonging and responsibility and involvement that maybe they didn't have before. And so I really think that it can be a win-win-win, and it's not something that requires, hours of studying and prep, like leading a small group or a Sunday school class every week. It's not something that requires you to, cut out crafts ahead of time, as working in children's ministry can often do. It's something that literally anyone could do with a little training and a little knowledge, and can fill a great need for the church and maybe a great need within that person. So I think that it's something that every church, regardless of size, should address, should have a conversation about. Excuse me. And something that can be filled. Another thing that I want to address really quick is security outside of the hours of the church. Okay, that I have seen countless times. I mean, I'm sitting here thinking I can think of so many right off the top of my head of church vandalism. Churches are an easy target for vandalism. Most churches, even the smallest churches, have several thousands of dollars worth of equipment, sound equipment within their church, computer equipment within their church. And I know personally have experienced several times with churches, a few that I can think of right now, where they've come in on Sunday morning and their soundboard was gone. Their speakers had been ripped out of the ceiling, microphones gone, keyboards gone, that people have vandalized the place, taken stuff and not taken stuff. For $300 and $15 a month, you can get a Simply Safe system with 24/7 monitoring and help alleviate those issues right now. I don't care what the size of your church is. You can find out a way to come up with less than $300. Just bought one for my mom a week ago, a Simply Safe system. Less than $300 and $15 a month for 24/7 monitor, and take care of that issue right there. And if you're thinking, well, I've been the pastor at my church for 35 years, it's never happened. It only takes once.
Yeah.
It only takes
Everybody's
once.
healthy until one day they're not.
Yep. Yeah. And so some very bold, proactive steps that any church can take to help increase their awareness and their safety and security at their church.
No, I agree 100%. There's too many options. Even if it's things that you don't do monitoring, there are cameras and stuff that you can get that run on that upload to a cloud that you don't have to monitor, and it deletes off every 48 hours or something like that. But if you come in and on a Sunday morning and your stuff's gone and you haven't been there since Friday, you're still there. You can go, you can get that footage, you can download it, and you can go, okay, who came into the building and did this? And so there's a lot of ways. If $15, if $315 is too much, like there's ways you can do it a little bit cheaper. May not be the best, but Yeah, Simply Safe. You've got the Ring systems on Amazon, and then we use a local security company. I mean, we have. There's always ADT and stuff like that, but we've got a security company that's local that we use that monitors all 3 of our churches, and yeah, so I mean that kind of stuff just works great and is a huge help in those moments.
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend arming your security system while church service is taking place.
Nah.
That might push some people away.
You're locked in until I say amen.
That's it. Nobody else comes
Locked
in the door
in until I
without the
say
key
amen.
code.
That's my new church sign.
Hey, speaking of church signs, you saw one the other day that you were excited to share. So why don't we transition, as we're running out of time on this edition, why don't we transition to signs?
It was me reading the sign.
What's on my sign? Here's your sign.
Was driving through my home state of Alabama just a couple of days ago, and I saw "Get right before you get left." Do better, Alabama. Come on. We don't need that sign anymore. Do better. Come on. I literally didn't know that anybody was even using that sign. I mean, like, I've heard that forever. You better get right before you get left, brother. And I sounded kind of like Hulk Hogan there, brother. But I feel like he's the guy who would be reading that sign if anybody was going to. But like, I just thought, and we were driving down the road and Melissa sees that, and I was like, you've got to be kidding. I didn't see that. She's like, nope, you saw it. Like, come on.
Did you turn and go back and get a picture?
I told her, and because we saw a couple more, and I went, asked her the other day, I said, what was the one? And she said, I can't remember. All I remember is when it had their service times, it said Sunday at 10 a.m., and it was Sunday, S-O-N-D. I'm like, come on. Like, do better, Alabama. Come on. You can do better than this. If you're from Alabama, guys, I grew up in Hollywood. This was not in Hollywood or Scottsboro. So I'm not throwing my hometown under the bus, but I grew up in Hollywood, Alabama. I went to school in Scottsboro. Like, I have a monstrous affinity. Dude, it was so good going home. I don't know. I mean, you ever just go home? And I hadn't really been to my hometown in like 30 years. I mean, it had been a long time since I've been there. And I drove through, and literally once I got to my house where I grew up at, I could have gone anywhere. The little grocery store around the corner was still there. It was amazing. But hey, if you're from Alabama, don't hate me. I'm from there. I'm just saying we got to do better.
Got to do better, Alabama.
Got to do better, Alabama. Roll Tide.
You're going to be saying a lot of that the next few years about football season. Got to do better, Alabama.
We're going to be really good.
Got to do better, Alabama.
I am super excited about DeBoer. It's going to be great.
All right. Well, that is all the time that we have for this edition of the Small Church Podcast. We want to thank you for listening and tuning in. I know that this has been a heavy conversation and maybe something that you haven't thought about, but if you would like more information, we invite you to join us on higherministries.com or find us on Facebook. We'd love to hear your thoughts and ideas surrounding the topic of church security and safety. We want to thank you for listening. Please be sure that you hit that subscribe button, that like button, wherever you're listening to this podcast, and share it with your friends. The more that you share it, the more that we can get people a part of this conversation. I want to remind you to be praying for our good friend Bruce Montgomery and his family as he is recovering this week in Florida. Keep them in your thoughts and prayers, and we will try to keep everyone updated as to how we are doing. I want to thank Robert for being back here with us again, and those of you that are listening for being a part of this small church family. Have a great rest of your week, and we'll talk to you next week on the Small Church Podcast.